Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Swing Fit Wealth. Today we are talking about why headline yield is often very, very misleading. So if you ever seen an ETF advertising a yield like what you're seeing in YieldCanary right here, underneath the headline yield column, you can see MST showing 303%, TSYY from Granite Shares showing 287%, you have 260%, 245%. These headline yields, the way we calculate them, is the trailing 12-month yield. And the advertised yield on a lot of these websites that you'll see are often very misleading as well, because they leave out destructive return of capital, or said differently, the money, your money, being returned back to you. So today I'm going to show you why using YieldCanary will give you the real numbers, stripping out that destructive return of capital, and you'll see the difference of what you actually receive versus what these funds say that they're paying you. So stick around, because this could save you some serious portfolio damage. So let's get right into it. So headline yield, it's usually the trailing 12-month distribution divided by the current price on an annualized basis. And issuers like YieldMax or Granite Shares, they often advertise a different number on their website. So they usually take the most recent weekly payout and multiply it by 52 and divide it by today's price. So that number can really inflate what their true yield really is. So our headline yield in YieldCanary, this column right over here, is the actual trailing 12 months. So it's what investors really received over a full year. And when we subtract the destructive part out, the return of capital, we get what we call the true income yield. So you'll notice here for MST, the headline yield is saying 303.91%, but the return of capital is 100%. So really your true income yield is zero. And a lot of people don't understand this, but this is what one of the key features of YieldCanary really is. So said differently, this is how people fall into a trap. They're seeing the big headline yields, but most of it is return of capital coming back to you. And that is essentially the trap that a lot of people fall into. So you could see these death clocks when I sort for the highest headline yield. A lot of these death clocks, which death clock is the time it would take for 50% of the NAV to erode under the current conditions that the fund is in. And you can see these death clocks are all less than a year or a little over a year. Here's a good example of one that's actually pretty healthy right now, which is PLTY. You can see the return of capital is only 5.71%, and the true income yield is 111%. So that's a big difference between what they're advertising versus what you're actually earning in income, or what the fund is actually generating in income. Now we could look at something that is obviously very healthy, like JEPQ. You could see return of capital 0%, and headline yield matches exactly with the true income yield, which is around 8%. So when you're using YieldCanary, I know a lot of people don't care about NAV erosion. There's that whole argument with, as long as the fund's paying you, you don't care about your money eroding or how you're getting the income. But if you're one of the people on the other side of the spectrum that worries about NAV erosion, this is a good way to use YieldCanary. You could see what the return of capital is, the way we estimate it, and then you could see headline yield versus true income yield. So when you're using YieldCanary, you always want to be looking at the true income yield, because that is subtracting out the destructive return of capital. Another thing to notice with when you're using YieldCanary is the death clock. If it says NA, that means that we can't even calculate it because there basically is no NAV erosion on a fund that is not showing a death clock. We could look at another example, one of my favorites, SPYI from Neos. Again, not showing any destructive return of capital, and headline yield is also matching 11.73%. It's also matching the true income yield. So if you wanted to sort on healthy, this is how I usually look at YieldCanary. I sort on healthy. I know some of the dying funds, there's an argument to be made there, but if you sort on healthy, these are going to always have very low, less than 20% return of capital, destructive return of capital. And then you can do your own research with headline yield versus true income yield. So here's YieldMax's NVIDIA. You can see it's showing a little bit of return of capital, just under 15%. And when you subtract out that return of capital, you can see the headline yield 80.5. When you subtract out the return of capital, the true income yield is about 68%. So this is how I use YieldCanary, one of the ways to compare headline yield versus true income yield. And like I said earlier, we calculate headline yield a little bit differently than what you'll see on a lot of these issuers' websites. Headline yield for us is the trailing 12 months. On the YieldMax website or Roundhill, you're going to see probably a different number because they calculate it differently, and we're actually adding a column to show the advertised yield. So you'll be able to compare headline yield, advertised yield, and true income yield. But like I said, true income yield is the column that you definitely want to pay attention to. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the way that YieldCanary factors in taxes. So if you're in a brokerage account, you need to be worrying about withholding for taxes. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about that. They will say things like, if a fund's returning or giving you 50% distributions, you'll make your money back in 2 years. That's just not true when you factor in taxes if you're in a taxable account. So real quick, the take-home cash return and the monthly spendable cash yield, these two columns factor in your tax rate that is up in the settings here. So if you click in the upper right-hand corner and go to settings, I have mine set to 20% right now. And let's just we'll take Goop as an example. So take-home cash return, what this is telling you is over the last year, the capital appreciation plus the distributions you received, combine those two together and subtract out the taxes that you would have to withhold. And so you can see right here, 42.68% when I have 20% in for my taxes. If I go and put that at 50% tax rate, hit save and refresh, you're going to see Goop now drop to 40.89% for the take-home cash return. So if you are in a taxable account, you always want to be worried about your after-tax cash return, and take-home cash return and monthly spendable cash yield. Both of these columns factor in your tax setting that is in the upper right here. So I'll put it back on 20. Click save and refresh, and you will see Goop jump back up to 45.38. So moral of the story is never trust headline yield. You have to be worrying about the destructive return of capital, and you have to be worried about the canary status and the death clock. I mean, all these columns are important, but this is just a way you could use YieldCanary to see and give you the confidence to know where you should be putting your money, where you should be investing. So that's it for this video. If you want to see more of this stuff, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I know some of this stuff can be a bit confusing, and we are definitely building out YieldCanary as we go because feedback is critical. If you join YieldCanary, there is a feedback button up in the top right-hand corner. You can let us know if something doesn't look right. So subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.